All right, folks, welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Justin, here with a quick word before we dive in. Now, in this episode, I chat with actor and comedian Janet Varney about improv, hosting dinner and a movie, voicing Korra, and faking her relation to Jim Varney, and more. As always, thank you all for listening, and without further ado, here you go. All right, Janet, take us back in time. You're a youngster. Are you a book reader, fort builder, troublemaker, or all of the above?
Oh boy. I guess I'm gonna go with all of the above. I guess I'm gonna go with all of the above. I don't know that I was like, I mean, troublemaker, that kind of makes it sound like I was pulling a bunch of pranks. I wouldn't say that, but I definitely was like not necessarily behaving.
It's subjective,
Yeah. There was
Depends
a
on who you
lot of
ask.
like, yeah. And then fort building, yes, 100% fort building, but also like using those same fort building skills to like stack a precarious amount of like chairs and boxes to get up to where like the peanut M&Ms were hidden from me so that I could steal them. So that's like a combo of troublemaking and fort building.
So, did you read books? Did you have a specific author,
Big
maybe?
reader, yeah, huge reader, very much so. Still am. Yeah, I loved. Oh my God, like there's so many. I think my favorite book still is A Wrinkle in Time. I always tell people like if you want to learn how to be a good human being, you only need that book. And like Ray Bradbury, I was super into. I definitely like my dad was the like taught at a public high school when I was a
Hmm.
kid. In fact, ended up being my senior English teacher. But when I was little, he would take me to like the over the summer when he was like doing student planning and lesson planning and stuff, and he would stick me in the English department like head where all of the books for all of the different grades were, and I would just go through and like pull books out that I thought had cool covers, and so they had a bunch of Ray Bradbury books, and so I started reading those when I was really young, and a few other things like that where it was like I don't know, I had access to stuff, so even when I was like 8, I was just like getting into it.
I love Bradbury too. I remember reading, I think it's The October Country, which is like his anthology.
Mm-hmm.
Loved it. And Something Wicked This Way Comes. All those were
Oh,
just.
that one's so good. Yeah,
Hmm.
I love them all. I love them all.
So, whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where Ray Bradbury actually lived for part of his adult life.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
totally
awesome.
crazy and random. Yeah, a friend of mine actually got me. They like he lived in like a craftsman house downtown, and like 10 years ago they tore down the house, but this like preservation society or whatever sold some of the beams, so I have bookends that are made from the beams of part of the like his house, which is kind of cool.
Holy shit, that is cool.
Yeah, I know. It's so crazy. I was like, this is an amazing gift. What?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, your dad worked in the English department, but was anyone in your family artistically, creatively inclined? Do you think that's where it comes from?
Yeah, I mean, both my parents were teachers, so they were both like very much people.
Yeah.
And they were like the fun teachers, who did cool stuff. My dad definitely, I think he might have minored in acting, or maybe he was just like doing plays and stuff. But yeah, he's definitely a big personality and like very funny and silly and yeah. So I think it came from there either way. I don't have like, but I definitely, yeah, I don't come from like a long line of thespians like Drew Barrymore, you know.
So when you think back to formative films and TV shows you grew up on, what pops into your head?
Definitely Sesame Street and the Muppets, no doubt about that. Used to watch that stuff with my dad. He was very good at doing impressions, especially of like Jim Henson characters.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of like Kermit telling me to eat my vegetables growing up. And what else? I mean, also, like, he definitely showed me like a lot of Mel Brooks movies. So, like, Young Frankenstein or Frankenstein,
Yeah,
depending on how
right.
you choose to look at that, was a huge favorite for me. And I think that was very influential on me because Madeline Kahn and Terry Garr were so funny and cool and pretty and like strong. And so I think they were probably pretty influential on me in terms of like being a girl in comedy and feeling like that was okay, you know?
Hmm. The That just makes me think of my troublemaking story, which is the only two things I've ever stolen in my life as a kid
Uh-oh.
was visiting
Yeah.
my grandmother, and she had Blazing Saddles on VHS
Oh my God,
and
I love it.
Stand By Me. And those are the two things I've
Yes.
stolen.
Did she notice or did she even
No,
care?
she didn't
Like you
care.
probably could have just been like, Grandma, can I have
Yeah,
these?
but my parents would not have let me watch Blazing Saddles.
I see. Well, yeah. I mean, he
Maybe,
was
maybe a
doing
little bit.
some edgy stuff
Yeah.
even then. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so those were huge. And then yeah, when I got a little older, like watching reruns of like Kids in the Hall and,
Mm.
kind of the sketch stuff, weird sketch stuff, weird movies, like I definitely got real into that too.
Was music big in your household? Which records were spinning?
Yeah, definitely music was huge. Not so much for my mom. My parents split up when I was very, very, very little. I don't really have any memories of them together. My mom was not a huge, she would like listen to classical music and put on Prairie Home Companion, which I also love. But my dad is a drummer,
Mm.
and a very, very good drummer, and was in bands and all that kind of stuff when he was younger, and continued to I like, it's very funny, but I always tell people like my house growing up, my dad had primary custody of me, and we had a very small 3-bedroom house, but the the master bedroom was mine. The master, you won't say that anymore. The primary bedroom was mine. The biggest bedroom was mine, still small, but and then the middle bedroom that had been mine when I was very little, when my parents were still together, is now the bike room. So my dad's a cyclist, so he just had a room full of like his bicycles, and like to tuning up and like all of his gear. And then the back bedroom was the den where his giant Klipsch speakers were and his drum set. So, and then he slept on the sofa bed. So kind of a weird, like it's basically like if a bachelor had a daughter, that's sort of how he like organized the household, and it totally worked. So he definitely was like, I got introduced to a bunch of music as a kid. Like I was super into the Police and Sting, and like, he played a lot of Jackson Brown and Neil Young and Cat Stevens, and there was stuff that like, and Talking Heads was huge. There was stuff that I thought of more as my dad's music, and then there was stuff I thought of as like our music. So my dad would be like, listen to some Steely Dan, and when I was a kid, I was like, I hate this, but please put on Talking Heads.
Right.
So yeah, so those were he's like definitely like a rock and roll guy.
Did you ever pick up an instrument yourself?
I did. I took classical guitar from grade 5 to like when I was a freshman, I think, and then I just started like, writing dumb folksy songs and stuff. So I played guitar. I took piano when I was really little, but that just did not stick. And then as an adult, I also started playing bass just because it was kind of more interesting to also be able to play the bass instead of just, rhythm guitar. Because I was never like a noodler. I'm not a good like, guitar solo person at all.
Right. I gave up guitar for bass too. Less strings. I need less strings, less to focus on.
Right? Yeah. Let me hold down some rhythm with a drummer. I'll probably be good.
Were you a big concert goer growing up?
I was, yeah. I definitely went through, yeah, I would say I did. I mean, I saw a lot of small shows. I definitely went to some kind of big arena shows, certainly more than I do now, I'm sorry to say. But, even when I was in my 20s, like my back started acting up and I was like, I'm way too young for this. But I would be like, is it seated? I can't stand. They're like, okay, old lady.
That's how I feel now going. I used to go to a bunch of metal shows, but now I've
Yeah.
I've become the old man standing at the back with my arms crossed now.
You're like, I can't move my neck anymore. I can't head thrash. I feel you.
So it's a question I like to ask everyone. Feel free to take it whichever direction you want. Is
Sure.
what scared you as a kid?
What scared me? Great question. Well, I definitely had a lot of stuff that I like, like kids do, like thrill scare. Like
Hmm.
I definitely was obsessed with sharks. Like every report I could write that I could pick whatever I wrote on, but felt still like it had to be like science-y, I would write about sharks. Um, I was not particularly scared of the dark. Oh, why am I making this hard? I was scared of black widows and most spiders. I was very, very scared of most spiders. Like if there was a daddy long legs in a large room, and I was across the room from it in a bed, but it was over there in the corner, I would not sleep all night. I would just stare at it, waiting for it to come over. Daddy long legs, like that's it. And now I live in a house where it's like all spiders all the time, and I'm just like, you guys won. You
Right.
won. I can't be afraid of you anymore because you are everywhere at all times. So I guess we're good now.
Are you still in Arizona?
No, I live in LA.
Okay, I was gonna say I think
Yeah.
Arizona there should be a lot of spiders and scorpions and all kind of crawlies around.
Yeah, there's a lot of crawlies. I think more than anything, at my dad did was somehow we got lucky and we just didn't have a lot of bugs coming into the house. But my mom lived right near a really beautiful like wash, like a dry riverbed that would, flood in the monsoon season. And we definitely got our share of like sewer roaches.
Yeah.
And once we had a tarantula, which we both felt terrible about because we certainly weren't going to kill it, but it was like because we like tarantulas, but which is funny because I was afraid of spiders, but I think I somehow thought of them more as rodents, which I
Yeah.
liked. I liked
They're big
rodents.
enough.
Yeah, they're like, oh, they're so furry. They have like personalities. And so yeah, like two screaming women trying to like figure out how to save a tarantula, but somehow not get near it was very sad. But yeah, I think I would say that Los Angeles and where I live in Los Angeles has been like 99% more buggy than any place I've ever lived in terms of like what gets into the house and when.
Wow.
Yeah.
So would you consider yourself a theater kid growing up?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just went to public school, but I went to magnet schools that were like arts magnet schools, where you had to like take two buses across town to get to them. And so it was an early morning. And even though there were magnet schools that emphasized arts, it was still like the cafeteria was also the stage. It wasn't like schmancy in any way,
Right.
shape, or form. But I definitely loved doing plays, all the way up through high school and college and stuff.
So your first time on stage as a performer, how did that go? Did it go smoothly?
I think the first time I can remember like officially being on stage was when I was in first grade. We did a production of Snow White and I did get to play Snow White. They got, it was like, how you go to like, I mean, I love thrift shopping and like vintage shopping. And I feel like there was a time, and they don't do this anymore because that it was very unhygienic. But I feel like there was a time when you could like go and there would just be a box of old wigs that you could
Yeah.
like rummage through. And I feel like my memory of my Snow White wig was that it was like a brown, like woman's wig, like short hair, brown, like curls, like weird wavy, like short wig. And then I had like white blonde hair when I was little, and my bangs were straight. And I think they were just still sticking out underneath this. I mean, my memory of it is that I looked like I was wearing like a dead animal on my head. So if you consider that smooth, I guess that then it went super smoothly.
Hey, well, at least the performance went fine. You
I
didn't
think the
fall over or
performance was
anything.
okay. I think the performance was okay, such as it was. I mean, I shudder to imagine how dumb it must have been. But, when you're 5, you can get away with a lot and people just say it's cute. So
So as you progress, you're going to high school and college, still doing plays. Did you ever have to deal with stage fright or anything?
the thing that was the hardest for me, I never had stage fright. But when I was a freshman, no, a sophomore, well, it started when I was a freshman, but when I was a sophomore in college, I had started having panic attacks and like anxiety and stuff. And so when I got cast as the lead in this show called The Heidi Chronicles, I was really, really scared because I thought if I have a panic attack on stage, like I'm toast. Because those are not things that they for me lasted very long.
Hmm.
And I would not, like for me, it wasn't like Tony Soprano where it's like, I'm having a heart attack and then he just passes out. For me, it was like, I've suddenly been given like 6 hits of acid, like words don't make sense anymore. So I was terrified of that. So I did have to go. I like went to I found a therapist and a shrink, and they worked with me to like help me get past that so that I was less afraid of that. Thank God. But I don't recommend those to anyone. And I have a tremendous empathy for anyone with anxiety because I have it and I know what it's like.
That just blew my mind a little bit because I was literally just watching Sopranos clips before we got in here.
Oh, really? That's
I
so
was like,
funny.
whoa.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting show because it really like, it was a whole different way of sort of explaining anxiety to people that I really appreciated. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, this big tough guy can, has these panic attacks. Like I was like, yeah, good job, guys. We need to be talking about mental health more.
He still has to go to a therapist.
Still has to go to a therapist. Mm-hmm.
So did you have any favorite roles that you can think of during your time on stage that you enjoyed playing more than others?
Great question. I did love playing Heidi in the Heidi Chronicles. It's just one of those like great, I'm sure it was written in like the 60s or 70s. I guess maybe it had to be written in the 80s though, now that I think about it, because the whole idea is that you go through this woman's life and her friends from like it's a very grown-up play to do when you're in college because it's like the characters meet, I think, when they were in college, but by the end of it, I feel like they're in their 40s. So you're like, I'm trying to, I'm 17, 18 years old. I'm trying to pretend like I'm 45. But it was a very, yeah, it was a very like empathetic, interesting play. And so I really loved doing that. I got to play Puck in like a truncated version of Midsummer Night's Dream when I was a freshman in high school. I really loved that. And also like for the most part, when you go to public school and you're talking about plays that you have to pay like rights to, I feel we always did like these random plays that no one has ever heard of before or since. Like I've tried to like internet search certain plays that I did to be like, did I dream that play? And it's like impossible to find them. So there were a lot of like kind of odd, random things that I got to do. And one of them, when I was a junior or senior, it might have been junior, in high school, we did this play about the about like people who live in like train stations and subway stations and stuff. So it was this very touchy-feely, like be kind because you don't know why someone is unhoused, which was adorable. But my character was like, a tough talking yet vulnerable teenager. And it's written into the show that like she puts music on her like, portable stereo and then does monologues. And they let me pick what music was playing in the background while I was doing these like intense teenage angst monologues. And so I picked a bunch of like Pink Floyd songs and that I felt like the shit. Like I was like, I am so damn cool. Like I am so cool right now. Look at me, everyone. Yeah, super embarrassing.
Was that in college?
No, that was high school. That was still
Oh,
high
okay. I
school.
got you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, speaking with actors over the years, and us non-actors, we always hear the term method acting, and I think it's kind of
Yeah.
it's muddled.
Uh-huh.
So, speaking with actors, it feels like each actor has their own specified method that they piece together and that works for them.
Yeah.
What's your method?
Boy, I think my method for a long time, I mean, I wish that I could say, I'm always kind of fascinated by people who did the work and really took acting seriously as adults, as an art, and which it is, and who dedicate their lives to it. And I feel like, unfortunately, some of those people get a bad rap because somehow it can also turn you into maybe the worst version of yourself, and you're like horrible to people on
Yeah.
sets. But for the ones that are good and are still kind human beings, I totally respect that. I think for such a long time, I just kind of felt like a kid. I mean, I took all the theater classes and all of that kind of stuff, and I loved doing all of that. But I also just felt like this kind of innate thing that I think a lot of kids feel, which is it's really easy to imagine you're someone else. And it's easy, and all my RPG friends out there, like shout out to the D&D. Like it's
Yeah.
if you have an imagination and you're an empathetic person, it's just it's not hard, I think, to understand what it feels like to be in someone else's shoes and to also find what parts of yourself you're kind of turning up or turning down, depending on what the character is. And then when I was in my 20s, I was sort of running away from the idea of acting, and I had sort of decided that that was like a very self-serving kind of thing you could never make money at anyway, and I was kind of embarrassed by it. And I think I carried that with me because I was doing sketch comedy, and like comedy, the comedy world, the alt comedy world can be a little bit cynical and sarcastic. So there's a lot of like, don't be earnest about anything. Don't have strong feelings about anything. Like, don't show that you care about something. And I think I kind of fell victim to that when I first came to LA because that was what I was around. And then little by little, I found out like, oh no, all of these comics are like super sensitive and like so afraid of their feelings. And eventually I think many of us were like, oh wait, you also like have depression? You know what I mean? And then it started to kind of untangle a little bit more, which was like a very cool thing because now I feel like I can kind of tap into that, protect it, like self-protection if I need to, but I also am like much more comfortable saying like, yes, I wear my heart on my sleeve and I can cry on a dime over someone else's like situation. So that's a really long way of answering. Like, I don't know that I have a method other than really know your lines, really show up and like really listen. And I think improv helped me a lot with that too, is just to be present and not like, it's shocking how hard it is sometimes to not just be thinking about the next thing you want to say or that you have to say, if it's a line or if it's real life. And I think it's really helpful. I say monologuing and not listening to your word you're saying right now, Justin. But I think in general, in regular life, when it's not an interview, like really showing up for the person that you're talking to is only going to make you a better blank, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Agreed. And it sounds bad, but doing the podcast for all these years and talking to successful actors that I grew up watching, like just an example, I was talking to Michael Ironside and Daniel Stern, and it makes me feel so much better that they think that they suck. It's just like
Yeah.
all these people have imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
and it sounds bad, but it makes me feel better about myself.
It
So.
should. It should. I'm all about that. My podcast, the JV Club, is all about like, let's peel away this idea that just because someone is famous means they've got their shit together. Let's just all like know that that's not the case at all. I'm not into pedestals, like just not into that. Love Daniel Stern, and he's like an amazing artist.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's kind of his passion, from what I understand. I have so much respect for him. I think he's amazing.
So just sticking on method acting for a second, not asking you to name names or anything, but have you ever had an experience with someone who was a bit too, chill out a little?
It's more just people I've heard about. And I think they're the same people we've all heard about. It's just people who are like, oh, you had to be addressed as your character on set. You stayed in character and you would not speak to an actor who played your adversary, like stuff like that, where I'm like, man, I get it. And I think in many cases, like you see the results of that and it's really impressive. And I just don't have that. Like I'd have to change the inside of who I am, I think, to turn that into a method for me.
Right. So if you took all the external factors away from it, be it pay or rehearsal time, do you have more fun as an actor if you're on stage, in the booth, or on screen?
Oh, that's really hard. Probably on screen. I haven't done I haven't done like a stage play in so many years. I do a lot of like sketch and improv, lots of improv, because that's easy because you don't have to prepare anything. And if it sucks, you have the excuse that you didn't have to prepare anything. But like just doing a run on a play I haven't done in so long, and that is scary to me. Even though that used to be the only thing I did. It's funny how you just kind of fall out of habit with stuff. I love doing voiceover, but for me, the feeling of being on a set and having it be like a little town or like a little summer camp full of people who are all working towards the same goal is really special. Like I develop really deep fondnesses for like everybody on the set, and thank God they're not all actors. You know what I mean? Like actors have the reputation of definitely, I think there are some people who walk onto a set and are like, I'm the most important person here except for the director or whatever. I do not feel that way at all. I feel very apologetic about being the actor. I'm very aware. Certainly we put in long hours, but I ain't gonna pretend like they're as long or that they're as hard as a Teamster or as, a grip and electric or just, really anyone. Costumes, like name it, they're probably working harder than we are. And so I have nothing but respect for those folks. Those are my people. And so that feels good. Like what makes me happy is like making a crew laugh by
Mm-hmm.
like making fun of myself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
but it feels like you're all getting together to make this thing. And that attitude starts at the top, like the producer or the director, I think, or like the star or whatever, has so much influence on what the vibe of a set is. And uh, for me, it's like, what is the point of doing anything but keeping people in the best possible spirits and best possible feeling of like camaraderie and teamwork?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're only going to do a better job if you're not like, I'm not a big fan of like, it's a scary place to work and that's why everyone's so good at their jobs. Like, I just don't, I don't like that.
It takes a village.
It takes a
Specifically,
village.
yeah. Yeah.
It takes a village.
So how did you land your first professional acting gig post stage on screen? How did that happen for you?
I'm sure it would have been like I'm trying to think of what it would have, I'm sure it was in San Francisco. I can't imagine that I did anything before San Francisco. Um, I'm sure it would have been a commercial, or for sure my friend Cole, who I still produce Sketchfest with, which is my comedy festival in San Francisco. I do every year now for like over 20 years. He had an agent in San Francisco, and he was like worth when we were in college. And so he would like get auditions and go out. And I remember he got on Nash Bridges,
Mm.
which is a Don Johnson show. And Cheech, shout out to Cheech. And he got on it and he was like, you should go on it. And I was like, I don't have an audition. I don't have an agent or anything. He was like, no, you should just like sign up to be a background actor. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so I definitely did background on a couple of episodes of Nash Bridges, and it was really fun. I mean, it's not like they treat, background performers great, but I think they were nicer probably than some sets, in part because it was in San Francisco, and it's more exciting to be doing anything in San Francisco because it's more rare. But Cheech was so nice to me. Cheech we like hung, I mean, he wasn't like flirting with me, right? It was not like that. It was just like a very kind, great man who was just very nice to everyone and made everyone feel like they deserve to be there. And it was a really good experience. Like, shout out to Cheech again. Shout out to Cheech. Don Johnson, also very nice. Also very nice. Just was not around him as often.
So I've done my research, Janet, and I know that you're not related to him, but
I'm not.
how often did you get hounded early on about Jim Varney?
I still get asked that, and so I was a Jim Varney fan from way back, because when I was a kid, my dad's best friend, Jim Genoviak, shout out to Jim, lived in Denver, Colorado. It was my dad's old college roommate. They were both like just, big comedy dorks, and like really, Jim gave me like his old Steve Martin LPs, just very into comedy. And in local Denver television, Jim Varney was doing these commercials as Ernest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we even knew his name for the longest time, because he was always just talking to Vern, and he was always talking to camera. And there were these really funny, and he would literally tape these commercials and save them for us, so that when my dad and I would come visit them, we would like sit and watch a bunch of Jim Varney commercials. And so this is like very much pre Ernest Goes to Anything. These are just these little local regional commercials. And so when he broke, we already knew his name was Jim Varney. And like, so when I was in high school and he was doing movies and stuff, I told people that he was my uncle, which I never held on to. Like, I never tried to sell that for long. I would just be like, he's my uncle. And they'd be like, he is? And I'd be like, no. But my friend Tina, for some reason, I just decided that I was going to like really try to make her think that. And so for a whole year, I kept saying that he was, and she kept saying, I know he's not. Like, I know he's not. I think I've heard you say he's not to other people. And I was like, that's because my dad doesn't want to like turn it into this whole thing where his brother's famous, blah, blah, blah. So I have to like, I'm not supposed to tell people. And at some point she was like, fine, if he's your uncle, let me see pictures. And this is like at the end of this year of me insisting that he was. And I took her back. We went back to my house, and I like went in and got like an old photo album of my dad's with no, plan, and just started flipping through, and finally found like an old picture of my dad in like a group of people, and like you couldn't really see the other people. And I was like, that's him. And she goes, oh my God, that is him. I can't believe it. Oh my God. I spent the whole year thinking. And the second she believed it, I was like, no, 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 he's not. He's not. He's not. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, he's not. I feel terrible. I don't want you to actually think that. Like, I couldn't. The jig was up.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But by my own design, the jig was up. I felt too guilty.
Yeah, the most impactful quote unquote celebrity deaths of my childhood were the crocodile hunter.
Oh yeah. Oh, the crocodile. I mean, that was so distressing and so disturbing and upsetting. And I just kept like, I couldn't let go of that one. It
Yeah,
was so sad. And Jim Varney.
Jim Varney and Chris
Yeah.
Farley.
And Chris Farley and
Yeah,
John Ritter for me
yeah,
too.
yeah.
And Jim Henson. Those are
Oh man, they're
some,
adding up.
and Madeline Kahn. Like there are some really hard ones where you're just like,
And later in life,
oh
Robin Williams.
no. Oh God. Yeah. Robin. Yeah. That was really hard. That was really, really hard.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking earlier about movies that you grew up on, and one of the shows I grew up on was Dinner and a Movie.
Nice. Me too, before I was on it. I mean, I used to love watching Dinner and a Movie. It never occurred to me ever that
How,
someday I would like be on it.
how'd that happen for you?
I had moved down to LA. I think I had only been there a couple of months, and I got an audition, and I didn't know what it was for until right before, because I think they were keeping it a secret that they were replacing the wonderful Lisa Arch, who I adore. And it's just one of those things where nobody wants to replace anybody. And again, I didn't even know what it was until after the fact. But to go in, and then I swear I had like almost no notice, because when I walked in and Paul Gilmartin and Claude Mann were there, I was like, oh shit. Like, yes, okay, these are people that I love watching. And so I just tried to like push that down and make jokes, and somehow they decided to hire me, and then I did it for 7 years. So at the end I was the longest host alongside them of any of the ladies. And I'm still friendly with Lisa and Annabelle, but I mean, I thought Annabelle and Claude and Paul were just like the coolest
Mm.
people, as because they're older than I am, and yeah, I would totally watch Dinner and a Movie.
Do you think that sort of the rise of streaming platforms had something to do with that being canceled eventually?
Oh, I think so. And I think they're actually bringing it back. I
Wow.
think they're like I think some of those local cable channels that are struggling because everybody, cut the cord and all that kind of stuff. I think they're actually trying to do more interstitial stuff so that commercials have more value
Yeah.
to those smaller networks. I heard a rumor that they're bringing it back. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's was a part of it, because the timing is, yeah, it was like just we got canceled right as like that, the inception of like, oh wait, you could just watch HBO as an app. I feel like that was like right around then.
Yeah, that's kind of a downside to streaming. Yeah, you have everything at your fingertips, but what I loved watching like horror host growing up, like
Oh
Elvira, and all
yeah,
that stuff is
of
gone now.
course. Elvira's doing a whole thing at Knott's Berry Farm right now. Like it's 40 years of Knott's Berry Farm, and they're doing a bunch of Halloween stuff. And Elvira has like a full on like stage show.
I did not know that. That's
Yeah,
cool.
I've met Cassandra at a con, and I was like really excited. And
She
she's
still
so
looks the
beautiful and she
same.
looks so great. I know she looks totally the same. And she's awesome. Yeah. She's amazing.
So was it your goal to sort of break your way into the vocal booth, or did it just happen naturally?
I definitely wanted to. I felt I sort of didn't even really know I mean, of course I knew that people do voices for animation, but that had not come to me when I was down in LA for the first couple of years. And so at some point I was like, wait, my commercial agent has a voiceover department. At first I thought that was just where like they recorded radio commercial auditions and stuff. And then I came to find out like, no, they also send people out to audition for Nickelodeon shows and Cartoon Network shows and stuff like that. And so I actively went to my commercial agent and said, you have a voiceover department. What do I need to do to get sent out on auditions? And he was like, do you have any voiceover experience? I was like, not really. And so I took some classes just to make sure, I was comfortable on the mic. And, there is a technicality to it for sure that I think a lot of actors who started on screen and who now do voiceover sometimes we like gesticulate wildly and flail and hit the microphone, or, we get caught up, and you like, no, you really have to have control of your body in a totally different way. But I did. I actively was like, I want to have these opportunities. How do I do this? Help me. And then I was able to start auditioning, and then started getting some voiceover work.
Just curious, who was your teacher?
I had a couple of different coaches, and none of them were like, "Oh, I studied for 10 weeks with this person." So unfortunately, I don't even remember their names,
Okay.
which I feel terrible about, but it was like a mix and match of like, "Okay, go do this because they're great at commercial auditions. Go do a couple of, sessions with this person because they're great with." But it was like, now it's been so long, I don't remember.
Hey, they were
Sorry,
good at their
voiceover
job,
instructors, you're
apparently.
wonderful. Yeah.
So
Shoot.
I know this was more prominent in the 80s and sort of the early 90s, but have you ever worked in I think it's called ensemble environment where your guys are all together in the same room and not individual
Oh
groups?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is definitely in my experience almost never happens now, but I think Nickelodeon may still try to do it. But certainly all of Korra was recorded as an ensemble. We got
It
to record
was?
with the cast. Yeah, in person. Yeah, at the Nickelodeon studios.
Wow,
So
I had
like
no
all
idea.
of those incredible people who were in the regular cast and who came on for seasons and guest stars, I got to work with all of them in person, and it was amazing.
Do you think something's lost when it's not done that way and you're just in a booth? Do you think there's a little bit more extra when you're all together?
I do. I mean, I think so. I think, vocal directors are great, and very often, I think almost entirely now, most of the voice directors I work with are actors, or were actors. And so they know they're great performers, so they know how to give you, as much as you, but it just doesn't change the fact that if you're in a scene with four other people, and that poor voice director is having to read all of those extra lines, it's just not going to be the same experience as the actual people who are playing those actual roles, doing it with them and really having that real life interaction. I far prefer it, and I think probably most people do, and probably voice directors and studios do. It's just a scheduling,
Yeah.
thing. And probably just becomes so hard that it's just really hard to do. I haven't done a Nickelodeon show since the pandemic that I haven't recorded alone, but they may do more of that now. I should ask someone if they've gone back to being in person.
Post COVID, has most of your stuff been recorded from home, or are you going back to the studio and stuff now?
Now I'm almost always going to a studio, but there are definitely some like video game companies and stuff that are like, no, people need to have a home studio. And I don't even have, like, during COVID, I, did the thing that many people do, which is like I really converted a closet. Like it
Hmm.
was, and it sounded great, and I have great gear, but now I'm out in like sort of an office, and it's not soundproof the way a studio would need to be. So for those things, I'm always like, someone else can do that. They'll need to hire someone else who does have a home studio, who works all the time, because I don't work as much in voiceover as, most of my VO friends are just exclusively voiceover, and they are working constantly.
Hmm. So when it comes to Korra specifically, what do you recall about the audition? Was it just a typical audition looking back?
Yeah, I mean, there were multiple callbacks because they really, were Mike and Brian were very particular, and they, I think, knew how special the first series was, which I also knew, and was terrified by. And so they really, they put people through, a process.
Hmm.
So I was a series of, and like there would be enough space between each callback that I would be 100% certain that they had already cast it and I hadn't gotten it. So when I found out that I got it, I was sort of in disbelief.
Really?
Oh yeah, I couldn't. I mean, I was like, again, it was I just had done almost no voiceover. I mean, I had done, I think, one pilot with Nickelodeon, and it didn't get picked up. And so the next thing that I, was really in the running for that I got was Korra. So I just I couldn't wait to get the firing part over with. Couldn't wait to fire me quick so I'm not as attached to it, you know?
Were you given much direction for the voice initially? Is what you auditioned with, was that eventually what became the voice?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was so ready to do, again, because I came from comedy and sketch and stuff, I was like, what I bring to the table is voices. This is going to be so fun. And lo and behold, I'm auditioning for something that's very earnest, fairly serious, and they liked natural voices for those. So, I do a podcast now with Dante Bosco, who plays Zuko, and people just say, I feel like I'm listening to Korra and Zuko do a podcast, and we're like, we can't help it. That's just the voice. They just wanted our voices. So I do feel like I had a conversation where, I think the very first audition, I was like, and so what can I give you? Like, what kind of crazy, let me open the trunk full of silly voices. And they were like, no, we like your voice. So the only thing that I remember thinking was like, in terms of attitude about Korra, the little that I, knew, because they're very, secretive about it. Um, I had I sort of had Christina Ricci in my head.
Yeah,
Um, especially in The Opposite of Sex. I don't know if you've ever seen, I think
I
it's called The
haven't.
Opposite of Sex.
I'm not familiar with
It's a
that one.
really small indie movie that she's in, and Lisa Kudrow was in. It was like one of the only things that she did, I think, while she was doing Friends. It was like, but she's just she's a teenager who is, very tough and just over it. But of course is very vulnerable underneath. And for some reason that just like really, so I kind of had her in my mind when I auditioned for it.
Sometimes I forget that Dante is involved in Korra and
Mm-hmm.
Avatar. He's always been Rufio to me,
Oh, sure, sure, absolutely. And will always will be. Always will be.
So, how far along the ride did you realize that you guys were nailing it? And this wasn't just a short-lived Avatar spinoff. This is actually a huge show in its own right.
Well, I mean, when we started recording, I was like, this is extraordinary, and this is great, and this is and the people that they had, doing it, and just the whole experience, I was like, this is very cool and wonderful and beautiful, and it's going to be great. That didn't necessarily mean that I knew that it would do as well, as it did, but I knew how good it was, like right from the beginning. Like the first time I saw any of the animation, in like ADR, like picking up, lines or doing fight sequences, which is, if you record, like people watch anime, all of that is recorded in Japanese, and then people have to come in and like match to the lip movements and stuff. And so they're seeing it finished. But, when you're on a show that gets animated after you record it, they animate to you except for the fights. And then you come in and you match what they've done for the fighting. So that's where we would first start to see footage, and I just had tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and how beautiful it was and how lucky I felt, and I still feel that way. Like I still, put on a episode. If like I haven't watched Korra in a while because I've been so deep into the first series, doing Braving the Elements, which is that podcast I was mentioning for Nickelodeon. And I'm just about to start watching Korra, and I started watching the first episode and just immediately started crying. Was like, I just can't believe I can't believe I still get to do anything to do with this world. And I know how lucky I am, and I never want anyone to think otherwise. I love it. I'm a fan. I'm a fan
Hmm.
of the thing.
That's
So
always good to hear.
yeah.
Because not that that's a bad thing, but you hear a lot of voice actors that never listen to their work and they just do it, and that's that. Which that's more power to them. But
Yeah.
when when the actor is attached to it, there's a little something extra. I feel as a fan that we can tell.
I think so. And I, again, like some of my friends who just work all the time, it's like if Gray Delisle tried to watch everything she did, she
Yeah.
would never be recording anything because she would just be watching herself all the time. So they get, those folks get a pass when they're like, what voice did I do? Although she knows Azula backwards and forwards because people still love that show so much. And I would say same with Daphne and like her Fairly Odd Parents. But yeah, there's definitely something to be said for like when you know that what you're doing is great, and also it just changes what your relationship is to like representing it and talking about it with fans and stuff. Like the first time I did a Comic-Con, I was so embarrassed. I was like, what am I doing? Like people want the character, they don't want to meet me. Like this is going to be such a letdown for everyone. And then it became clear to me like, no, this is an exchange. Like these are people who want to tell you they're excited to have someone who represents a thing they love
Mm-hmm.
so that they can tell them what it meant to them. And I love that. And it's such a different experience than doing something into the void and just going, I hope people like it, or like reading a nice comment on, on Instagram, which also means if you're on the internet, you're probably going to read shitty comments. Like actually having an inhuman or an in-person human exchange with someone, where you guys are both talking about something that means a lot to both of you, is like my favorite thing in the world. It's just beautiful.
And it's great for fans, but I feel like it could also be good for the actors because you just never know which project that you work on is going to touch someone, and maybe you thought
Yeah.
that sucked, I wasn't good in it, but then you realize it's very important to this person. They watched it when their
Yeah.
mom had cancer, or it's
A
got them through
hundred
stuff like that. It's
percent.
just great for everybody.
Yeah, it's a really really special thing, and I think people there are people who can be cynical about it on both sides, who just aren't doing it and aren't having those experiences. Because I think I when someone says like, oh, I don't know, like whatever, I just did this dumb cartoon, whatever, I'm like, you've never. I can't imagine that you've ever talked to someone who exactly like what you just said, Justin. Like you don't know what someone is going through and what this distraction is, or what this thing that happens in this one moment of the show makes a aha moment for someone
Hmm.
and they change the course of their life. I mean, this shit happens,
Yeah, it
and
does.
it's like extraordinary. And both, like I said, both my parents were teachers, so I saw them impacting young lives every day and what that looked like. And so I always felt really guilty about, again, I've told you I have like actor shame. So it also reminds you like you're part of a something bigger, and
Hmm.
you don't know, like coming back from the pandemic and doing cons, having, because I felt like some of that guilt during during the pandemic, and having people say, and I absolutely have had so many people say like, I was a nurse, or I worked in hospice, or, you know, I'm on the front lines, or I was an Amazon delivery driver and no one was on the street but me, and it was hard and scary, and all of that stuff, like, and this thing helped me be better at my job because it inspired me, or it was fun, or it was relaxing, or it was a comfort show, or whatever. You're like, "Oh my god, okay, speaking of it takes a village,
Yeah,
like, all right, we all need to show up for this life?"
yeah. And just in the same vein, my wife is a first grade teacher, and her inspiration for becoming a teacher was Miss Honey from Matilda. And
Yes.
and all of her
I
kids love
love
her. Her aunt's kids
that.
love her. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if she's coming at it from like, how do I be this magical, important person in someone's
Exactly.
life? Like, you
That is how
can't,
she approaches it. Yeah.
and about teachers, I say, give them all the money. What are we doing? Give them all the money. What is happening? Come on. Oh,
It's to the
gotta
point
fix
where
that.
other teachers at her school dislike her because when they're walking down the hallway,
Oh no, she's
all the other
too
kids stop
beloved.
just
She's
and
too
pile on her.
beloved. They can be Miss Honeys too. They just gotta come at it from a different way. That's all.
Right. And her reasoning is, I don't know if these kids get hugs at home, so I'm going to give them a
Oh,
hug
I
whenever I get a chance to
love
see
your
them.
wife. Oh my
Me
God.
too.
1,000%. No, it's just that's exactly like what a beautiful, that's what we want. That's what all anyone could ask for, is like somebody who's dedicated like that to their little kids' minds. Like, how huge is that? It's so important.
It is. It really is. So, uh, Janet, what would you say is the best acting advice you've received in your career, and who gave it to you?
Great question. I'm trying to think if there's ever just like a moment. I always envy people who are like, I knew the moment I was gonna da 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 because they turned to me and said, um, I'm trying to think. I feel terrible. Like I mean, I've been so influenced by so many people who have been so kind and like welcoming in, and I can't think of like a moment, like a one sentence moment that I could say, okay, this is the very best advice. But I will say, going back to like even just taking improv and um thinking you're in this frivolous kind of environment where it's like just all about getting a laugh and stuff, and then learning very quickly from a good teacher who's coming from, like a second city background, or all the stuff that's spun off from that, um saying like, if you're not listening and if you're not present, like, why are you here?
Right.
And I think that that really did help me like across the board.
Is there, can you think of a time that you've been working where you've been starstruck with one of your coworkers?
Oh, it happens all the time. All the time. I mean, every single thing I work on, there's somebody on there that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm working with you. I mean, I got to do this show Platonic, and I love Rose Byrne. And just getting to work with her and finding out that she's just an extraordinary human being who's just funny and warm and humble. And you would think that she was number 50 on the call sheet. Like she's just
Hmm.
not, she's just awesome. She's just awesome. Like I was totally, and you have to get over being starstruck because you're like, okay, wait, everyone is a person. And it's always like this dance of like, when is the proper time for me to tell them how great they are? I don't want them to think that I'm like a sycophant or that, we're not peers, because you are, but you can't change the fact that like, I mean, I couldn't believe I got to work so much with J.K. Simmons. That was insane to me. He's a genius. So yeah, I always am constantly like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to do this.
So, out of all the projects you've worked on, be it on stage, screen, or in the booth, which would you consider the most challenging? Is it when you lost sleep over?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, Well, probably the most challenging was Stand Against Evil, physically. It was just very physically challenging. We were shooting in Atlanta in the summer. And so for all of y'all who know, like being in the South in the summer is very hot, very humid,
Preach to
hot
the
into
choir.
the night, right? I was wearing high-waisted polyester sheriff's pants and carrying a gun with like no bullets, obviously, but carrying all the same stuff and wearing big heavy boots. And I'm happy to say that those things also prevented me from getting like the chiggers and ticks that many of our poor crew would get when they were standing in the middle of a swamp. Um, but it was hard work. And running over and over and over in that is very hard, and almost passing out, and like fight sequences and all that kind of stuff. It was very hard. I loved it, and I would go back in a heartbeat to do more. But, like the first season, I got really sick. I had a terrible cold. Um, that I look back on now and I'm like when I had COVID, my cold was worse than
Mm,
having like first round COVID where you're like, I feel like I'm gonna die.
yeah.
This cold was terrible, and I still had to go to work. And it was, I would like finish days and just start bawling because I would just be like, I can't believe I just did that somehow. So it was definitely the most physically challenging, but it's so worth it and so exciting but like, again, anytime you meet like a Walking Dead person or anybody who's ever worked on a show like that, know that like they earned whatever money they got paid, and they continue to earn it from what they went through. It is hard.
Agreed, agreed. So I like to wind down with this question here. Have you ever had an experience that you would consider supernatural, paranormal, or an event you can't explain?
I wish that I had a million that I could tell you about. Super Fox Muldery, like, please show me as much as possible. Someone, I'm waiting. I'm so ready for a ghost. Please, I want a ghost. So I haven't had a lot of experiences like that, but I have had a couple of things, and I wouldn't necessarily have thought that I would be this person. I feel like I'm like and I think a lot of us can relate to this. So I think I'm a very cynical but very, very hopeful person. So I'm going to be the first person to say like, I doubt that was what you thought it was. And then everything underneath that is like, but I hope it was what you thought it was. You know what I mean? And those are two things to really have to like to hold that for a lot of us, to hold both of those things in our minds is a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but I lost my mom during COVID, and I can 100% say again, I'm not a person who's like, and every time I see a robin, like, and then that's a real thing. I just never would have thought that I would have had those experiences because I will always explain them away.
Hmm.
And I have had a couple of things happen to me that are so strange and extraordinary. It is a lot more than I saw a hummingbird when I was thinking about her. Now, sometimes that happens too, but I've had a couple of things happen where, and luckily my husband was like part of that as well, where we are like, I don't know where to put this except that there is stuff going on that we don't understand. I don't know where else to put this. And again, that is not coming from like, I just hope, we hope so hard. We have, you know, you go see a medium hoping you can communicate with, like, I know what that hope feels like. I was 100% okay with my mom passing. Like, it brought her a lot of suffering to be alive. And so
Yeah.
I don't believe that, like, and my my partner is not like so deep in grief that he's imagining things. So I can honestly say, like, when people lose people, I'm like, dude, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not saying that, like, she's a ghost. I'm not saying that I can say it's her, but I've had some stuff happen where I am like, there is no way this is just a random blah, blah, blah. Like, it is way too deep and too crazy for that. So I feel very confident that whether it's what consciousness is, which scientists are still trying to figure out, what happens to energy after it leaves your body, what the soul is, whatever that is, I 100% feel like I'm wide open to there being something going on that we think of now as mystical or supernatural, and that people turn their noses up, but like 100 years from now we're going to be like, can you believe we didn't realize that, like, interdimensionality was totally a thing, and we just got, like, I don't know, we don't know, we can't explain
Right.
consciousness.
Right.
So I do think that there's more than we've been able to unpack yet, and I think it's unpackable. And I think it's really, really arrogant for us to be like, guess what, every time in history that everyone said, no, we know what this is now, and they turned out to be wrong. Like, every time in history they were wrong, but now, right now, we finished with science. Like, we're done.
Right.
We got it, everybody. Like, no way, you know?
I agree with you. So, do you consider yourself religious or spiritual or anything like that?
I mean,
Just
I do feel like spiritual. I do. I think that's, yeah, I think I'm agnostic, leaning hard into, I think something's going on, but I don't know what it is,
right.
you know?
My vibe with
And
that.
I love people. I love people's faiths, and I absolutely, like, applaud people's faiths as long as they don't judge others or hurt others because of their faith. Like, I think that's a pretty simple rule, but it gets complicated real quick for people.
Yeah, well said. Well, Janet, just to put a bow on this thing here, what's on the horizon for you? What can you share without getting in trouble?
I know voiceover is so funny because there's everyone's so top secret. Yeah, I've been working on a show. Hopefully, it'll get some traction. It hasn't come out yet, so I can't say anything about it, but I've been loving working on it. Um, I am still doing the podcast Braving the Elements with Dante. I have a bunch of podcasts that I get to do. I love podcasting. I love interviews. I love conversation. I love having people in my ears. And it's fun to watch them when they're on YouTube. I do a wrongful convictions podcast called Truth and Justice. We're trying to get someone out of prison in Michigan right now who is 100% innocent. I do Braving the Elements with Dante. I do the JV Club by myself, which is me talking to famous people about their awkward teen years. And
That's up my alley.
I'm missing one. Yeah. And then I also am just about to have a podcast drop. When is this coming out?
In the next week or so, week,
Okay.
2 weeks.
I think on Monday, Maximum Fun Network, where my JV Club podcast is, announcing that the great John Hodgman and I have been working on a podcast where we explore each state's motto and state symbols. And it's been so much fun. It's been so much fun.
That's awesome. I want to check out what was the AV podcast?
Oh,
JV?
the JV Club. It's like Junior Varsity / Janet Varney, because
Got
I got
you.
to take advantage of that JV initials. Yeah, that's what, like we were talking about earlier. She says bonking her microphone. I told you actors and microphones are dangerous. I've had so many amazing guests on, and so much of it is about, like, I don't want to pry into your personal life now or your vulnerability, but I think when people have distance from their teenage years and they can talk about how much, like, uncomfortable stuff happened, or stuff they were so ashamed of back then, or how scared they were, and how much some of those feelings still exist in us, it, like, again, levels the playing field, so that people are like, oh, John Hamm's just perfect, like, why would he ever, and then you hear about him being like, dude, I didn't kiss a girl till blank, like, all of that kind of
Yeah,
stuff, I
yeah.
think is such a relief for all of us to hear, like, oh, okay, we're all the same, got it, cool,
I love any content that sort of demystifies our heroes a
yeah.
little bit.
Oh,
They're
you'll
just
love it.
people.
You'll love it. It's really fun. It's really fun. It's funny and it's fun, but it's very sincere.
All right, Janet, thank you for giving me some of your time. I appreciate
Sure,
it
you
chatting with
got
you.
it. This was a pleasure.
Have a
Thanks,
great time
Justin.
and